possible way of making electricity, which might be solar, it might be wind, it might be water or something else.
Might it, for example, be biomass made from sugarcane?
Well, it could be that until we get ready, but I think the point is the transition. We got to get to this point where, for instance, for vehicles, that we're using more and more electricity for our vehicles, and that way we set ourselves up for the right development in the future. It could be that we use ethanol to generate electricity in the beginning. Why not?
Why would you use ethanol rather than just using the raw biomass? I mean, why go through that extra processing step?
You don't have to. I'm just saying it's possible.
Right, right. Which do you think is the greener?
I'm a little biased. I obviously believe that a fuel that can deliver 80% lower greenhouse gas emissions today or better and can reduce NOx emissions today is a better solution for now than something in the future. And I've pretty much given up trying to predict what happens 30 to 40 years from now. So I try to think about the next 20 to 25-year horizon. And in that horizon, it's hard to see another practical solution that is economically viable and that consumers prefer. And I think that last point can't be missed. It's interesting. I track U.S. vehicle sales very, very closely. The day U.S. gasoline prices drop below $2 a gallon, SUV sales jumped by 30 to 40%. And that was within the last 4 months. Now, I know that's a U.S. consumer, and I know sometimes they're a bit wacky, but it's interesting to think about how consumers make their choices. And it's interesting to note that U.S. electric vehicle sales, whether hybrid, and predominantly hybrid actually today, still make up very little and actually are under the expectations of most original equipment manufacturers for sale in the U.S. And I think that's an adoption issue. I think that adoption issue is going to stay with us for quite some time.
But those hybrid vehicles are not electric vehicles in any meaningful sense, because all of the fuel that's going into them is gasoline. They just use an electric system to make that gasoline much more efficient. I mean, what we are talking about is a very different sort of technology. It's a plug-and-play technology where the primary fuel source is electricity, which has come out of a power station, which in the case of America is 50% likely to have been coal-fired, I think, if I have the numbers right.
No, you're...
So at the moment, it doesn't look that green.
It's taken the U.S. consumer 30 years to get over the first diesels. And when you actually ask U.S. consumers how they perceive diesel, all of their impressions today come out of diesels from 30 years ago, and predominantly General Motors diesels. So the point I'm making is actually consumers make lasting impressions from early experiences.
Right.
And in effect, the hybrid vehicle in the U.S. is setting the first impression for what electric does in the future.
Even though it's not really an electric vehicle?
Even though diesels today have nothing to do with General Motors converted gasoline engines to be diesel.
Yes. A marketing point then. So, well, Dr. Patil.
No. I absolutely agree, because the cycle in the automotive industry, and part of it has to do with the amount that it costs for a person to buy a new vehicle and the seriousness of that decision, as opposed to consumer electronics, where you see things changing over very quickly. Because historically, if you look back in the automotive industry, it's maybe about a 20-25-year cycle before something gets introduced. Look at radial tires or anti-lock brakes before it becomes mainstream. So I think hybrids is a path for that electrification, for people to get more comfortable. In fact, I think the plug-ins offer a very good path to get to a full electric, because even though all statistics say that most of the trips, 85% of the trips are less than 40 miles, you know yourself, when your gas gauge goes down to 2 gallons, you start looking for a gas station. And here, that's the full range that the electric could provide. And so the point is, people need to get comfortable, and with experience, they will see that the 40 miles of all-electric range can meet most of their requirements. And that will set up the stage for transitioning to the full electric vehicle.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't think you can take as an example the current hybrids as what the future is going to bring. I think the current hybrids are a little bit of a feel-good factor that people needed. And it was somewhat of a luck that Toyota came out with the Prius, and everything kind of fitted with the gas prices going high slowly. But if you look at a hybrid today, of course, it is only improving maybe the fuel economy, I don't know, 10, 15%, because, of course, the vehicles are very small, so you have to compare
In
that
other
vehicle-
words, it's greenwash.
Well, you're going to have to compare that vehicle to another small vehicle. So the fact is that we don't really have any real electric vehicles on the road in terms of four-door vehicles that families can use. And what was just said right now is I think when you start seeing these real electric-driven vehicles coming to market, and specifically plug-in hybrids, because I agree, the pure electric still has an issue with range and anxiety. People are afraid to get stuck with an electric vehicle. And the point with a plug-in hybrid, of course, is that you have the electric, which is 90% of people drive less than 80 kilometers a day. So if you have an electric vehicle with a small battery and you can do 80 kilometers, that's fine. The problem is, what do you do when you go further? Well, that's where the range-extended engine comes in. You have a small gasoline engine which turns on and generates electricity. That one time a month or one time every 3 months you go further. And that's where I see the huge difference happening in the consumer mindset in the market when those type of vehicles get to market.
That doesn't answer the question, though, about why I would want to buy an electric vehicle instead of a biofuel. I mean, if I'm a green consumer, if I want to look good in the eyes of my neighbours or in myself, why would I buy an electric vehicle rather than a biofuel vehicle on the basis of its environmental impact?
Well, you know, the electric vehicle, the point is that where we see the congestion of emissions is in the big cities like Sao Paulo, or you see it in New York or London or wherever you live, because that's where most cars are used. So you cannot just look at a vehicle and say, well, this one is you know, this much, you know, only 80%. The point with an electric car is it's zero emission in an environment where we live. Sure, there's greenhouse gases somewhere else, but the concentration that we have of pollution is in the big cities, and that's where most of the traffic is. So the reason a consumer would buy an electric vehicle is because that is absolute zero emission in the most congested areas where people drive. And that will be the fastest way to drive down emissions in our cities, where most of the children are living and where the issue is that they grow up with pollution and so on and so on.
I would take exception to that. I think the people in LA would take exception to that. It's interesting how the pollution in China ends up in LA. So to say that I'm happy that the pollution occurs out there, not in my city, I just have a...
You mean the pollution in LA ends up in China?
Right.
Yes.
No. The pollution in China ends up in LA.
How so?
The currents, the air currents.
Oh, I see. I thought you were speaking metaphorically.
No,
you were speaking literally.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's literally. So
right.
I would hate to say that it's okay that in the country, or it's okay that in the Sacramento area, that we pollute in big power plants and we make the air dirty there, but actually I'm happier because San Francisco's cleaner.
Yeah, and you're also, I mean, this is an interesting point because, you know, there's different levels of greenery, and this debate's usually conducted at the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, nitrous oxides in the atmosphere, greenhouse gas warming, which is the level that I pitched the question at. But you know, there is this much more local question of whether the thing is polluting kids' lungs, for example.
Yeah, but wait, the point is, of course, not that we want to transfer the pollution. I think the point is we have to start somewhere. And as an automobile manufacturer, I cannot solve the entire chain of how energy is made, but I can solve at least the area of the car. So if the area of the car is zero emission and somebody else, and it's not my job to make power plants. So of course, my point before is that those power plants have to create as green electricity or zero emission electricity as possible. Now, how that's done, I'm not in charge of, but I think it's a beginning that we get green vehicles.
You are certainly
on
not
the
in
road.
charge of it, but
Right.
Marketing it, you know, to the consumer. If you're selling your battery-driven car as a green technology,
Right.
And the consumer comes back and says, "Well, okay, it's zero emission in the area."
No, let me answer that.
Yeah.
First of all, we have a large solar panel on our car, which helps. It generates up to 400 or 500 kilometers for free, emission-free, zero emission a year if you live in a sunny area. You can put solar panels on your roof, and you can actually completely go off the grid and charge your car that way. So there is ways, if you seriously want to be green and invest into it, you can do it. It's all a matter of how much you can afford to do. And the fact is, of course, today most people cannot afford to go out and put solar panels on the roof and spend $80,000 on a car. Our car is $80,000, not cheap, because this technology is expensive. But I believe we cannot just all the time talk about what would be great. We also have to do something. So what we did was we created a plug-in hybrid that we're going to bring to market at the end of this year.
Dr. Patil?
Yeah. No, I agree with the plug-in hybrid as the right first step for us to get to full electric. But I guess the other point is related to the pollution being created where the electricity generated. Because today, yes, in the US in particular, there is a significant portion of coal-generated electricity. But as we go forward and as the capacity gets replenished or replaced, it will be replaced by renewables. In fact, yesterday, Bill Clinton talked about the capability to generate strictly wind-based electric power. But that requires some improvement in the infrastructure. And furthermore, to me, the batteries provide another means of temporarily storing that electricity, because that's part of the problem with the wind and solar, is because it's not a continuous source. So I think things are moving in that direction. The other point that I want to make is, right now there's been studies that have been made that even if 10% of the vehicle population in the US switched over to electric usage, there wouldn't be a single watt of additional capacity that needs to be added. In other words, we're not going to be increasing. In fact, there will be a net drop because of the better utilization of the power that's already being produced.
Well, on the matter of biofuels, I mean, your company is not involved in ethanol. Your company is designing much more sophisticated fuels, which more closely resemble the ones made from petroleum. Now, how much do you think the adoption of biofuel technology depends on that rather than using ethanol? Is that a necessary feature of the future, or is it just an advantageous feature of the future?
I think it depends where you are in the world, right? I think in Brazil, there's been a great success in making ethanol a fully integrated part of the infrastructure and actually providing half of the needs for the gasoline pool in Brazil. I think it'll depend where you are in the world. I think in general, for the world to move more and more to a lower carbon footprint fuel, we will need better fuels. And a lot of it because we really do need a much stronger impact around the carbon footprint consistently across the world. And then secondly, the infrastructure. And that second point is really a fuel that's able to plug into the current infrastructure. There's over $1 trillion invested in supply chain infrastructure to move hydrocarbons around the world. That infrastructure isn't going to go away tomorrow, and it's very difficult to build a parallel infrastructure. So having fuels that blend directly into the existing fuel pool, I think it's really important. I also think a fuel that is as good or better, what we like to call no-compromise fuels, is critical for the consumer. The consumer doesn't like to make a choice or a trade-off. I'd like to be better for the environment, but I want to get less mileage. Or I'd like to say I'm using a green fuel, greenwash, but actually I'm not doing much different for the environment, and it's not getting as good a mileage as I do with my regular fuel. Consumers want a win-win solution. They want to be green, they want to get better mileage, they want their vehicle to perform as good or better as it does today. So I think fuels are going to have to meet the consumer's requirement to be able to get fast adoption in the market.
Right. Okay, I think that lays the groundwork. Is there anybody out there who would like to ask a question? I think there are some microphones around. Stick your hand up if you want to ask a question. That gentleman there. Well, actually, you ask, and then I'll go to you next. I'll take 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll have a general discussion about them.
Bom dia, meu nome é Otávio Lucchesi, eu sou advogado de escritório sueco. Eu gostaria de saber, eu não sei se já ouviram falar, mas o Brasil hoje enfrenta problema com a reciclagem de carros.
Could you hang on a moment, sir? Our translators aren't working.
I can switch to English.
That'll be good.
Yeah. No? English will be good. Here we are.
May I?
No?
Yes.
Yes, okay, got you.
All right.
Yes.
Brazil is facing... All right, I will switch into Portuguese.
Sorry, we all apologize for having no Portuguese.
All right. O Brasil tem hoje problema